Hello, and welcome to this video where we explore VirtualBox and virtual machines. Now, decided to create this video for those that are interested in learning how to manage virtual machines, for those that are interested in also learning about various operating systems. So before we get started, I'd like to answer some common questions. For example, what is VirtualBox? Well, VirtualBox is a free-to-use software and it's known as a Type 2 hypervisor. We'll get into that in a moment. But VirtualBox enables you to install, maintain, and troubleshoot various operating systems by managing virtual machines. So it has a lot of use, especially through educational uses. And that also goes into the Type 2 hypervisor, which I'm about to explain what hypervisors are, which they're software that enables you to emulate operating systems. So there's two kinds of hypervisors. We have type 1 and type 2. VirtualBox is type 2, and another example is VMware, which is also type 2. Now, type 1, which is bare metal, that is the type of hypervisor where you would create a machine with the idea of using the special type 1 hypervisor software beforehand. And it's known as bare metal because the type 1 bare metal hypervisor directly interacts with the underlying hardware of your local machine. And you also could do this in like a hosted environment, maybe through the cloud, where there's no OS layer. And that's the difference. It's a type 2 hypervisor does have that OS layer. And let me explain. So VirtualBox we're going to install on Windows 10 Home today. And through the installation, we're going to be using VirtualBox as an application. And type 2 hypervisors are known as hosted hypervisors. So we have bare metal and we have hosted. And the differences are bare metal does not have that OS layer. It's a special software that you install on your machine versus hosted, which hosted just means that it's running through an application on your operating system. So hosted does have that OS layer between the hardware and the software, as the type 2 is going to be typically a local application on your operating system. So there are some things to consider there is that to use these hypervisors, you need to have special configurations. So you may need to go to your UEFI or BIOS and enable Hyper-V or hyper virtualization. And you also may need to go to your settings and services in Windows and enable Hyper-V there. And this is important because if you don't enable the virtualization software on your computer, you may not be able to run this. And older systems may not even support this. So ensure that your system is capable of following along today through the demonstration by enabling the Hyper-V in your BIOS or UEFI and enabling it in your system settings. And in this case, if you're running Windows, you want to go to your systems and service settings and enable it there. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. And we're going to look up VirtualBox in our web browser. So as we can see, we can confirm some things here that we previously mentioned. Well, first off, it's by Oracle, which is a well-known company, and it's a powerful virtualization software. And it allows users to run multiple operating systems on one computer. So this is useful in that you could have, for example, multiple virtual machines that run, for example, Linux or Ubuntu server. And these virtual machines could do things like one can be a database, one could be a web server, and this helps isolate your services on your local machine, and it's very nice for setting up a test production environment. Now, the main difference, as we mentioned earlier, between type 1 and type 2 hypervisors is that type 1 is bare metal and type 2 is hosted. And there's actually some concerns here that we need to address before we get started, is that type 2 is great for learning and educational purposes and testing, but type 1 is better in terms of efficiency and security. So you may not want to run VirtualBox virtual machines in a production environment. though we're just getting started here, and this is a simple demonstration. I wanted to share that piece of knowledge with you before we get started. So here, as we can see, it says /wiki/downloads. This is the URL that we would like to go to. Now you could go to the website or go to the downloads here, but this option is provided by search engine optimization, and it takes us right to the download page. So we're going to go ahead and click there, and you can confirm again the URL up top, and you're going to want to make sure that that's the URL you're at. We can see that we have some different platform packages. Now, platform packages are essentially packages for your platform. So we have Windows, so we're interested in the Windows package. Or if you had Mac OS, you'd be interested in the Mac OS. If you had Linux, etc. So I'm running Windows 10 Home, and I'm interested in installing VirtualBox on my Windows 10 machine. So these are the downloads right here. So I'm going to click Windows Hosts, and it'll do the install. And now we're going to go to the Ubuntu website, where we're going to download Ubuntu Desktop. Now, Ubuntu Desktop is perfect for us in this test scenario, as it's free and open source. So let me go ahead and close this out. And you cannot see my download up here because I'm recording through OBS and it doesn't show the recordings. Or it doesn't show through the recording the download. But I had installed the version of VirtualBox. And then we're going to look up Ubuntu or Desktop Ubuntu. And you can see that I've searched that before. And you're going to want to make sure this is the URL that you're going to, /download/desktop, because they have some other URLs, and if you search up something different, it may pull up different results. For example, a common one is #desktop or #desktop in place of the download/desktop. And that will not take you to the desktop download. So this URL will take us there. Now you're going to want to you can manage your tracking settings, but I'm going to accept all and visit the site. And we see some useful information here. We see desktop, server, core, cloud. Those are the different kinds of downloads. Now we're going to be using Ubuntu 24.04 long-term support. That's what LTS stands for. And you can see that here as well. Long-term support just means that they support that operating system with updates and security fixes. So if you're using that long-term support operating system, you can ensure that your systems will have support for, if there's a security vulnerability and they update it, they may not be updating other versions. So you want to try to stick with the long-term support version. We can see other info here. We can see that the ISO image that we're installing today is going to be 6 gigabytes. And the ISO image is what you boot from the flash drive, or if you download it to a DVD drive. In this case, we're just going to download it on our local desktop. And you can do that by clicking the download button. But before we get started with that, let me say you want to check out the system requirements. And as you can see, there are some requirements to using the desktop Ubuntu version. Now, Ubuntu server has less requirements, but in this demonstration today, we're going to be using Ubuntu Desktop. And don't worry as well, if you have a different version listed here. Same thing with VirtualBox. You should be able to still follow the steps and still follow along, as long as you're using similar software such as Ubuntu Desktop and VirtualBox. For using other software, you may need other configurations. So you can see that we need a 2 gigahertz dual core processor or better, 4 gigabytes of system memory. This is RAM, so 4 gigabytes of RAM. And then it suggests 25 gigabytes of free hard disk drive space by default. And like I mentioned, you could use USB drive or a DVD drive for the installation. And you want to have internet access here in order to download the file. So we're going to go ahead and click this, and it's going to take me to a different page. And you won't be able to see it like I mentioned, but the download is going to start. You might want to be patient for a few seconds, wait for this download to come up here. But essentially, the download will start, and you could sign up for their newsletter if you'd like it. You can get useful information from that, but we're not going to worry about that. And the main thing here to take away is that even if you have a different version, as long as you're following along and you follow the right steps, you should be able to get a virtual machine running. Now let's go ahead and I'm going to pause this. You know, everyone has a different download speed. So you can see here for me, I downloaded the VirtualBox essentially right away, but this desktop image is going to take a little bit to install. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause the recording and I'll see you in a few moments. And for the next step, you're going to want to go to your folder, go to your downloads folder. You're going to double click on the executable that we got from the VirtualBox website. This is going to begin the VirtualBox setup wizard. So once you do that, go ahead and continue following along with me, and I'm going to be there with you in just a moment. Alright, welcome back. And here we have the Oracle VM VirtualBox setup wizard. Now my version is 7.0.18, which is what we had installed from the website. But if, like I mentioned, if you're in the future, you may be running a different version, and that's okay here. And we're really not going to be doing much configuration in this installation, mostly just hitting next. And I'll point out some things, but we're mostly just letting the installer do its work here. So we're going to hit next. And as you can see, there are some options here that it talks about, you know, some features. It says USB support, networking support. These are just some basic features to enable your virtual machine to have access to USB support and networking features, etc. So we're not going to change anything here. We're just going to hit next. And now this is another thing to pay attention to. If you're continuing with this installation, it's configuring your NIC or your network interface card, which is in your local machine. And since it's messing with your network connection, it's going to cancel it for a moment. So you're going to want to make sure that if you're using your internet connection on your local machine, that you finish doing whatever you're using it for and proceed with the installation when you're ready. But I'm ready right now, so we're just going to hit yes. Now it mentions missing dependencies. You don't need to worry about these dependencies. They aren't necessary for our case. It just says proceed with installation now, and we're going to hit yes because we're just going to proceed. And now it says ready to install. So we're going to hit install. And look at that. It starts installing for us, and I'm going to let it do its thing, and I'll see you here in a moment once it's all finished up. Alrighty, it was relatively quick. As you can see, it says click the finish button to exit, and it's going to start VM VirtualBox for us once we hit finish. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finish, and then once it pulls it up, I'm going to continue the clip. Alright, and here we are. After your wizard has set up VirtualBox and it initiates it, this should be what you see. Now, if you had some virtual machines, they would be listed in this column right here. There are some UI components, some options, but we're just going to focus on keeping it simple. We're going to click New. Now, let me go ahead and bring up this new window. I'm using OBS recording software, so it doesn't pull up something every time I click on stuff. Go ahead and make it a little more readable. Alright, here we are. So you can see there's some configuration here. Now it mentions the ISO image, which we have. You should have this from your installation from Ubuntu on Ubuntu website, Ubuntu Desktop in particular, if you're following along exactly. And it mentions a name. Now you want to keep the naming convention sensible. In fact, I'd recommend perhaps getting a pen and notepad, or maybe having a document in the cloud that documents the information of your virtual machine, as it may be relevant to you later when you're troubleshooting or trying to access services from your virtual machine. We're going to get started, and we're just going to call it test VM -1. And you're going to want to use hyphens here if you use anything like that. Like, you don't want any spaces, you don't want any underscores. These sometimes are misinterpreted by different operating systems, but the hyphen is typically pretty safe to use. And if you see, it has this folder here. It's using my C drive. I don't want it to use my C drive because something of note is that when you're using your drives, you don't want to use a hard disk drive if you can avoid it. The reason being is your virtual machine is limited with its read-write capabilities depending on what drive you're using. So I have an SSD on my local machine, and I'm gonna place the folder for it. So right now I clicked on folder and it gave me a drop down and I hit other, and I'm currently selecting the folder for which it's at. And I'll go ahead and show you here in one sec. I'm going to create a new folder. Didn't really do that. If you could see, it's my F drive. That's what I'm creating the folder on. Alright, so I created a test folder on my F drive. So I just did that simply through the File Explorer. I clicked a new folder, I created this folder, and then we selected it. So this is where it's going to create your virtual machine. Now, we have our ISO image. My ISO image, when I click on this drop down, it comes up for me in my downloads, but I'm going to go ahead and show you in the File Explorer where it is for me. So let me go ahead and pull this up. And here we go. As you can see, this is my File Explorer for my local system. And now this is on my C drive, which is on my hard disk drive. Now, you probably would want to keep this on the same drive. For example, this is where you would want to be documenting things, like where is your ISO file, where is the folder from which your virtual machine is being set up. But just to keep it simple, this is my downloads, and this is where the ISO file is. So just for this example, I'm going to use this here. But you may wish to move this to, for example, that SSD that we had mentioned before, or M.2 drive if you have access to that. So here we have selected the ISO file, and if you look down here, before it said Windows, now it says Linux, and it says Ubuntu 64-bit. That all looks correct to me, and if it says the same on your machine and you've been following the steps, it should be correct. So we're going to go ahead and hit Next. And here you're going to want to make sure to edit these settings, because these are the default settings. So if you did not edit these settings, and in the future you wanted to make some changes, your username and password, these are the default username and passwords, that's what they should be. But we're going to edit these here. So we're going to do, let's say, guest, because this is like a test OS, we're just going to be a guest on this operating system. And then we're going to set the password. I don't mind showing you guys here, because I'm going to remove these resources once we're all good. We're going to create our password as password. And as I said, this is the host name. So this is going to be the name of your machine over the network, for example, if you're doing ping. For example, my current machine is Asura PC, so if I wanted to ping that machine, I would do ping Asura PC. In this case, it would be testvm-1. And then, you know, you have your domain name here, but the domain name doesn't really matter unless you're considering using things like Windows Server or creating a domain name server for yourself. We're not going to go into that level here. We're just going to hit Next. Now, here's the hardware, and this is what I was talking about when I said that you could edit the CPU count and the amount of RAM that you have. So, something of notice, this is 2 gigabytes of RAM. How do I know that? It doesn't really say right here. Well, see, RAM, 1 gigabyte of RAM, is 1024 megabytes. So for example, if we wanted 4 gigabytes of RAM, let's see, it looks like it doesn't change it ourselves, so I'll just do some quick math. We're going to double it because this is 2. So this will be 4,000. And then we'll do 96. 4,096. That's 4 gigabytes of RAM, which was suggested for us on the website when using Ubuntu Desktop. And you could always divide this number by 1024, and it's going to give you the amount of RAM you have, in terms of megabytes at least. And then, you know, it suggested a dual core processor. We're going to go ahead and give it 2 processor cores, and that should be perfect for us right here. So these are some good settings to run for Ubuntu Desktop. And we're going to hit Next. Now this is the virtual hard disk drive. This is created on the file that you've selected for your virtual machine, which for us is on the SSD. So when it's performing read writes, it's going to be doing it on the SSD, which is nice because it's going to increase the performance, especially if you're planning on, creating a database for your virtual machine or interacting over the network with your virtual machine. Its read write operation will make a big difference. In here, I have a terabyte SSD, so we're just going to change this to 50 gigabytes, which is double the suggested. We're just doing that just because we can, but you could keep it at 25 gigabytes, and if you're using something like Ubuntu server, you could go even lower. And the virtual hard disk, it's going to create on that SSD, so we're going to hit next. And this is useful here, it goes over some information, like what's the name of your machine, what's the fault. Like, honestly, if you're doing some documentation right now would be the perfect time to do it, because it goes over all the information, such as the type of OS you have, the location of your ISO image, and it has some other information, like your RAM, your processor count, disk size, though you can edit these settings in the future. So we're going to hit finish. And let me go ahead, it looks like it cut me out right there. Here, let me get rid of that. I don't know why it's gonna remove that. And here we are. So as you can see, there's a preview right here, and this is going to be changing as I'm talking. It's currently configuring, booting, and loading Ubuntu Desktop onto the virtual machine, and this is done from the .iso image, which, as we mentioned, that's the copy of the operating system. You can use that on a flash drive, on a DVD drive, and you could boot from those drives, but in this case, we're booting from the VirtualBox manager. And you can see these settings here, like it has the 4 gigabytes RAM, it has 2 processors. It even has boot order, which that might be important if you're interested in the boot order for security, for example. As we go down, we can see more info. And let's see. As you can see, the network adapter is using Network Address Translation, or NAT. And this is my suggested default setting, as if you used a bridged network, it's directly on your network versus a NAT, which puts it on a subnet, which essentially it puts it on its own network. And this is good for security purposes. Let's say some malware happened to infect your virtual machine. If it's on a NAT network, it's going to be on a different network, a different subnet, which means that for example, if you had a file share on your local network, it would be safe from the virtual machine for the most part in terms of network configuration. So this is my default recommendation. Now if we see here, it's still booting in the preview, and I actually have a window that opened, and you can't see it now, but let me go ahead and edit that. And as you can hear, we hear some boot up sound from the operating system booting up. I'm going to go ahead and remove the audio setting, and I'm going to change the screens so you can see the Ubuntu Desktop that I'm running. Awesome, now here we are, and you can see the desktop window for Ubuntu. Make sure it looks correct. Alright, we're looking good. Now it says some things here such as mouse integration, auto capture keyboard. Now this is something VirtualBox does. It configures your mouse and keyboard to be accessible to the operating system. Now real quick, I'm going to go into the settings and remove the audio. Let me see, I believe that's done up here. So if you go through these, you can't see them on my local screen, I believe, but you could edit things such as the audio output. You could change like what keyboard is inputting things, There's a lot of different things you can do here. You could even change it to full screen mode, which, let me clear these notifications. As you can see, there's some white space around the operating system and even a scrolling bar. That's not common in an operating system, right? But I can adjust the size of the window right now, but if you put it in full screen mode and did the right settings, it would look like you're just running Ubuntu Desktop, and it would fill up your whole monitor just like it would if you had booted from Ubuntu Desktop on your disk drive. So now that I've shown you how to create a virtual machine, I hope that it's been a fun learning experience. And I'm still going to go ahead and walk you through a few more things here, just the rest of the installation of Ubuntu Desktop. So it's pretty friendly here with the graphical user interface. I believe it uses the GNOME environment, the GNOME desktop environment. If you install a different distribution, it might use, for example, XFace or one of the other options, like KDE. So here we're going to hit next because we want the English language. And so there are some useful settings here for accessibility. For example, there's the screen reader option. We could let's look at the other ones. Visual alerts, typing, sticky keys. These are some things that you might find in Windows or Mac OS. And Ubuntu Desktop has these as well, and so do some of the other desktop environments. A lot of them come with some features like these, but we're just going to keep the defaults. You could select your keyboard layout if you have a different language you prefer. We're going to stick with English. We'll use the wired connection. And we're going to skip the update. We're just going to try Ubuntu. I know I'm going through these fairly quick, but these are just default settings you don't really need to pay too much attention to. And like we said, this install Ubuntu alongside your current operating system. We don't need that because this is a virtual machine. We want the virtual machine to boot Linux. That was the whole point of this. So we're just going to do try Ubuntu without making changes. Close. And here we are. We're in the Ubuntu operating system. There's some cool things you can do here. If you click up here, you could go to the settings. Here's a power button, dark style. You can see we're on a wired connection. I'm about to do that here in a sec. But we could do settings here. And as you can see, our IP address on our local network, it would look something more like this with like the 192.168. But because we're using network address translation, the IP address is different. And it's on a different subnet. So it's not on the same network as our local machine, which helps improve security. And you could go through a couple different things. There's the sound. You could change the output devices. We have appearance. You could edit all sorts of things. The color, the background, all sorts of stuff. Very useful. Like there are a lot of different things you can do with Ubuntu Desktop. I even have used it as my own personal operating system for a little bit. That was fun. Let's see if we can access our hard drive. It's like 480 megabyte volume. Looks like we got an error there. And that's the issue sometimes with the configurations, is not everything may work exactly as expected, but let's try the Firefox web browser and see what we can do with this. Now we should have access to internet with NAT set up, as I currently have access to the internet on my local machine, and using NAT should still be able to use the same network. So let's go ahead and go to YouTube. And as you can see, we have access. It's loaded YouTube. We could see, try searching something. Let's search Ubuntu Desktop for fun. Maybe we'll see some things and learn some more. We got some of our YouTube friends here who got some uploads, You might want to check out their videos if you're interested. See 24.04, their background looks different. That's interesting. So we have access to the internet here, which is very nice. And Firefox, which is a browser that I haven't used that much in a long time, which is kind of funny. We got show apps here. That's something I've noticed, is no matter what desktop environment you use, there should be some settings, like for example, here we could go to different virtual desktops, though that might be a little much considering we don't have a lot of computing power to access right now. And then we could go right here, show apps. As I mentioned in my Linux video, it looks like it has the two desktops open maybe because I clicked that up there. We're not going to worry about that right now, but you can see they have common utilities, has like a LibreOffice suite, which honestly is like Microsoft, where you have Microsoft Office, Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Excel. There are free open source alternatives with Linux. So a lot of the software that's pre-installed here is free, and there's a lot of different things we can use here. I could see terminal right there, but we're going to go ahead and use the search bar. Whenever you're using an operating system, the search bar is your best friend. If you're ever unsure where something is, use the search bar. It'll pull it up. So we can see here terminal. And something to note is it doesn't have the username that we had assigned when we initiated the server in our configuration. Well, in a lot of times when you install Ubuntu, it by default shows, for example, Ubuntu, which is the default user, and I believe the default password is also Ubuntu in a lot of cases. Let's go ahead and explore a little bit. ls, see, we could see some of the things that have come up. Let's go ahead and do ls-l for the list version. We could see all this information here. We got our downloads, documents, desktop. Now, because this is a virtual machine, these are different than our typical files. So let's go to the downloads directory. Oh, interesting. All right. I guess it wants me to type it all out. All right, all right. If you hit tab, it auto-completes sometimes to what it thinks that you're trying to do. It looks like there it was giving me results for what it could be. And as you can see, there's nothing here. Total 0. There's no results. If I do ls-a, which shows hidden directories, we could see the current directory and the parent directory. Nothing is here. So this machine is different than our local machine, which runs Windows 10, and you could, maybe it's seen earlier in our downloads folder, we had plenty of downloads. Here we don't have any downloads, so this is a completely separate operating system running through a type 2 hypervisor. It's being hosted through VirtualBox. Now, and we could take this a step further. We could download other distributions. We can download, if there was a software that's only compatible with Linux and not Windows, we can make a Linux virtual machine and we could use that software, or we could test our own software on various machines. So, this has been an exciting experience, and thank you for staying along for the journey. I hope you learned a lot in this episode, and I'll probably be referencing this episode in future Linux episodes as we explore Linux distributions, Linux commands, and a whole host and assortment of utilities and tools that you can use to make your workflow better. I mean, there's really no limit with Linux because it's open source and free. So there's a lot of support behind it for the community. And here we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and hit the X here. Now I don't know if you see this in the window. It doesn't show, but it says send shutdown signal, power off the machine, and then the option that's selected by default is save the machine state. Now this is an incredible feature from VirtualBox and usually other hypervisors. It can save your machine state. So if you have a virtual machine where you're doing some work, you can save your machine state, and it's almost like putting your Windows computer to sleep, for example, and then moving your mouse and it signs it back on with everything that you had. It's like that, but it's even more powerful because what it does is it takes a snapshot of exactly where you are, of your exact machine, and you could save the machine state and reboot it, and it's going to reboot right where you left off, and it's going to have all the same information. So as you can see, it says saving VM state. That's what I selected. And now if we rebooted we would have this exact thing come up where I have the terminal open, the commands that we typed. The best part, I could shut down my Windows 10 computer, reboot it up, boot up VirtualBox, and next thing you know, if I run this virtual machine, it's going to be exactly where we left off. So it's better than sleep, where it saves exactly where you're at. So, there's just so many great things about VirtualBox and learning and getting to test out your software and operating systems in this environment. And like I said, I was very happy to get to walk you through this. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help. And I look forward to exploring more with you guys down the road. So stay tuned for future episodes, and I'll see you in the next video.